Welcome to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person.
Dan, have you ever had so much on your mind that you couldn't calm the waters? Like it was a conundrum, like there was just influences one way and, controversies another way, and you've got all kinds of competing data and input, and yet you question yourself from the beginning to the end. Do you ever have that happen, Dan? Especially because you're podcasting for so many of us. You're telling us everything you believe in. Most of it's right. Some of it's not correct at all. A part of it doesn't even make sense. And yet you keep coming at us with all the information.
Yeah, things get overwhelming.
What do you do,
That's the way
Dan?
it
Is
is.
there, because I don't want to hear about the ADHD meds or anything. What do you do outside of medication to underwhelm yourself when you're in an overwhelmed state, when you know you shouldn't be where you are, when you don't think you don't know why you got there, you can't figure out how to get out of there, and yet you're still in the place you're in?
Cry and talk to a therapist sometimes.
Well, it seems to be working, Dan, because a lot of people are giving your video ratings nines, tens, if they're even like an 11 or like a Gem Mint Black Beckett Black Label something. So,
Yeah.
congratulations, my friend, on managing the scoozies the way you do. Okay,
Yeah. All right.
Dan. Today you'd like to talk about something. You brought the topic up. I said why. We fought about it intensively, and we opted to do a podcast called Coffee Talks on it because we knew that it would get so many viewers, at least 100 to maybe 87 to 132 views, and that's important. And so we're going to dive right into a controversial topic of the day because it's now actually there are other people commenting on it as well, so it's all good. So Dan, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about these Danish fan-made cards that CGC has authenticated and that Goldin auctions are selling. I was going to put this in my news video that is going up today as we're recording, but you wanted to do this on here so you could have your input as well. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely, just because I have some thoughts on it, and especially after watching a couple of other influencer videos today, there were a couple comments made here and there that I'd like to at least address. So Dan,
Sure.
hopefully at this point in the video, you will stick a couple of shots in, a couple of pictures of these
Yep.
cards, okay? And no two of the cards, to my knowledge, when I read the descriptions on Goldin, have exactly the same description, but they're close. Some of them are inaccurate just
Yeah.
because Goldin didn't do enough proofreading. I'm not talking about the general accuracy of what they've written. They've just got other like errors, mistakes, things, etc. So, but I thought I would read one. Dan, are you okay if I read one of the descriptions of one of the cards that you're going to have on the screen? So then we can kind of wordsmith through that and talk about maybe what's right and what's wrong.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so here's what it says. This is for one of the cards. I guess this is for actually, this is for Master Trainer Tony card, if Dan ends up putting that one up or not. So it says this is at the Goldin auction now, as Dan mentioned. Encapsulated and assessed authentic by CGC, presented is an almost never encountered 2007 Pokemon Danish National Trophy card representing Master Trainer Tony Anderson, a second place finisher at the 2007 Pokemon Danish National Tournament. At the 07 Pokemon Danish National Tournament, a grouping of Pokemon trading card game trainers printed their own Pokemon cards at a local copy shop by taping their images over existing card layouts to create the design. They then exchanged these cards with their opponents at the 2007 Pokemon World Championships as a type of greeting card between players. Text on the card states that it was made by Stefan S. Fromm, one of the most prominent Pokemon TCG players of that era. An incredibly scarce artifact of Pokemon's global reach, the card, which is branded with a not for play use label on the reverse, displays a mildly circulated manner of appearance. Okay, Dan, let's you start out from there, talk about the cards, and I'll weigh in with some points and questions as we go along.
Sure. So the description, it gets the creation pretty much correct. It's a thing that some Danish players made. They took it to Worlds, and they just had enough where every round they played at Worlds, they would hand one out to their opponent and say, here, this is something I made, this is for you. Don't know definitely how many copies they made. They could have made thousands of copies of each. My problem with the description is, as my problem with the authentication is, they're portraying these as Pokemon cards, which they are not. They are something made by fans of Pokemon. Like, they're made in the style of Pokemon cards, but I know it says fan made in the description, but I think that's burying the lead quite a lot in this. I think these auctions and this grading is deceptive. That is my whole problem with what's going on here, is that it's completely deceptive. It's not showing people well enough that these are not authentic Pokemon items. These are items that maybe you could class as associated with the Pokemon World Championships, because it was a thing that these players took to the World Championships. I can definitely see why someone might want to own these as a piece of history of it's kind of cool. I just fully do not think they should have been authenticated, and I feel like these descriptions should be focused so much more heavily on the fact that these are not actual Pokemon cards.
Okay, so let's go through a couple of points. Number one, and we'll talk through some of this. Number one, for all due transparency purposes, and I hope you can still hear me, Dan, because man, are you locked up on? Okay, now you're not locked up on my screen. We're good. I own a set of these cards. In fact, I'm the only one in the world that owns the whole set of these cards. Okay. Do I think they should be graded? Let's save that for a minute, because these aren't my cards at auction, and these cards aren't what we're talking about. We're talking about my cards aren't what we're talking about. We're talking about the cards at auction. Let's go down to what it says in it again. I'm going to read it again. These trainers printed their own Pokemon cards at a local copy shop by taping their images over existing card layouts to create their design. So, do you agree with that statement? Is it okay for Goldin to put it in there like that, that's what they did?
Not really, because they're not Pokemon cards. It's, you could say, I think removing the word Pokemon from that would maybe be okay, and say trainers printed their own cards at a local copy shop by taping their images over existing card layouts. That's more, it's at least more ambiguous as to what it is, but by saying they created their own or printed their own Pokemon cards makes it sound like this is an actual Pokemon card. Printing your own Pokemon cards is just counterfeiting Pokemon cards. Like, obviously these guys aren't trying to these players who did this were never trying to pass these off as real cards, but these aren't authentic. They're not real Pokemon cards. They have no association with the Pokemon company. So I feel like it would be a lot better, at least, if they didn't say printed their own Pokemon cards.
Okay. So what they could have said, based on what you're saying, is printed their own cards in the style of typical Pokemon cards. Something that talks
Yeah.
about similar to the product, but is not an actual product. I mean, you have to give some leeway here, because there are people that print fan art Pokemon cards and they say they're fan art, they're not actual cards, or they could have even put in parentheses here, not actual Pokemon produced cards, and that would have at least been more accurate in the description. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would have definitely been more accurate if they said they are cards made in the style of Pokemon cards.
Okay. All right. So now let's go to point two, because I've got several points to cover. Point two is, because we need to differentiate, I think, because everybody wants to lay it on heavy at who's to blame and what's accurate and what's not accurate. And most people don't know a darn thing. And your social media influencers who are going to badmouth everything for every purpose, there's never going to be found any bit of accuracy in anything. You and I are more objective, and we're going to go down into this a little bit and talk about what seems right and what seems wrong. Okay, so I believe to a certain extent the Goldin description is reasonably accurate in the way they talked about the creation of the cards. But I agree with you, they could have said not actual Pokemon cards in the style of Pokemon cards, etc. But now let's raise the level of our analysis up to the labeling on the CGC slab. The labeling on the CGC slab says Pokemon 2007 Danish national trophy cards not for play. So Dan, tell our audience what's wrong with that. Okay. So I know we may be restating a little bit, but explain what's wrong with that.
Almost everything.
Okay. So go ahead.
Everything other than 2007 and Danish is wrong. Putting Pokemon on the label, that's not even ambiguous now. Putting Pokemon on the label is presenting this as a real Pokemon card. Putting the word trophy cards on there is absurd, because you know better than anyone the term trophy card means something in Pokemon. Claiming these as Danish national trophy cards, there is no way to interpret that other than these cards were handed out to the winners of the Danish nationals. And if you look at them, they do look very, very similar to some Japanese cards. We have seen Japanese cards, which are authentic, legitimate trophy cards, which do have the winner's picture printed on them. That's a real thing that happened. The fact that these labels say authentic Pokemon trophy cards on them is a crazy decision by CGC. I also know it says not for play, and that is based on the fact that not for play use is printed on the back, which, Stefan and others did. But there are legitimate Pokemon cards that have that not for play printed on the back. They're jumbo cards, but that is a legitimate thing that Pokemon did. I think it may have been only during the WotC era, but Pokemon did print not for play use on the back of cards. So that alone doesn't differentiate it from not being a real Pokemon card. There's just nothing accurate about this. I mean, if CGC really wanted to encapsulate these cards, surely there could have been some sort of custom label, some sort of thing that, for a start, didn't say authentic on it. Something that was just a label that said, like fan-made Danish national cards, like Master Trainer Tony 2007 Danish fan-made card. That's fine. If they want to put it in a encapsulate like that, if they want to put it in a slab like that, fine. It fully shows what it is, and then the auction listings are going by that. That's then going to give people more information as to what it is. But the way that it currently is, it's just misleading people.
So I am in complete agreement with you on all of this, and I say that with an understanding of that I own every card in this set, which is over, guys. It's over 100 cards. I don't know how many it is, but it's hundreds.
That's from it's multiple years, right? I believe
What
your 100 cards. I believe your 100 and something cards are from different years, right? They're not all this exact style.
Okay, so
do they have different layouts?
I tried to find them in the last 24 hours when we knew we were going to do this, and I couldn't find them, so we can figure that out. But I just want to try to say that you guys, I want you to understand the way that I go about business, because I go about business different than the other social media influencers. It's too loud in their stuff. So how I go about business is I tell it like it is, okay? And I don't always have to like the answer, but I'm going to tell you the accuracy of the answer, and that's what it is. So the point here is that this labeling is absolutely and utterly ridiculous, okay? Because what are we authenticating? We're going to come back to that. Danish national trophy cards, as Dan said, there's no trophies, there's no winners, there's no losers in all of this. I'm not even sure there was a Danish national tournament, okay? Now, we'll see what Dan says about that, but I'm not even sure there was a Danish national tournament. And further, and not for play, let me talk about that for a second. I think that might be the way that CGC is trying to differentiate from the fact that these, by saying, okay, we're going to encapsulate these, but they're not for play. But there would be other trophy cards that, not even labeled or not labeled not for play, wouldn't be allowable to be played. So that isn't a way to get off the hook on this. And last but not least, on my just quick assertion in all of this, is I look at the card itself. It's got the World Championships logo on it in the center of the card, and it's got national championships. And I wonder how were they even able to get that stuff on there that soon? Like, how did they get the World Championship logos at a national championships prior to World Championships to be able to get that on a card? And then you were going to go to World Championships and already have these ready to hand out. A lot of that is confusing and to me as well. I haven't talked about the history of the cards yet, which I am going to talk about. But I do want to say that I think I think a lot of this doesn't make a lot of good sense.
So some of that I can at least explain. So yes, there was a Danish national championship up until I think 2015. Every country had their own individual national championship, and then it was 2016 to the 2016 to 2017 season, or maybe the 2015 to 2016 season, that we switched to the IC models that we have now, where there was 3 or 4 ICs around the world, and the whole thing got restructured. Before that, every country did have their own national championships, and it is true that the players that are depicted on these cards are the Danish players who finished high enough at their national championships to qualify for Worlds. So that's why the National Championships logo is on there, is because these are the Danish players that qualified for Worlds because of their national championship. And the Worlds logo is revealed, a month before Worlds. Because these were just mocked up with sellotape at a print shop, there's more than enough time for Stefan to have mocked these up and gotten the Worlds logo and put these on the cards in time for Worlds. There's no ambiguity of timescale there. The time definitely matches up for them to be able to have access to the Nationals logo and the Worlds logo in time before Worlds. And no, like these definitely wouldn't have been ready at the Danish National Championships, because they don't know on the day who's going to win. It's after they know who's won, Stefan contacts them, gets photos of them, then he makes them.
Okay. So Dan, let's talk about the encapsulation by CGC. This to me is quite concerning because where does it end? Where does it stop? You said a few minutes ago, I could see if CGC encapsulated it this way and said so-and-so about it, like a fan art or whatever, or a, whatever, but not an actual trophy and not an actual Pokemon card, etc. I don't understand anymore what is allowed to be put in a slab and not. It doesn't make any sense for this to be put in a slab. When you are, and of course I don't know when these were slab, but I mean, when you look at the play tests and whatever, and these cards are legitimate, folks. These cards are 100% legitimate to my knowledge, and I'll describe why, etc. Do not know how many of them are out there, so I can't comment on that. But they were made back in this 2007 timeframe. I don't believe there's anybody doing it today. I believe it's much different than the playtest situation. But that's not really for today's discussion. Today's discussion is, if you went by what you said, Dan, which I know you weren't really saying they should do this, you were just kind of making a point.
No.
You would encapsulate fan art. You would encapsulate somebody had a napkin, and there probably has been. Somebody had a napkin and was sitting at a restaurant, and Arita was sitting there, and they asked for an autograph, and there comes the napkin. There is such a slippery slope that it appears to me that CGC is opening up with all of this, that, maybe this is the last of the line. Maybe they could have written some vintage. Like, I think these cards are very, very cool from a vintage standpoint, historical standpoint, something no one had ever done, a creative standpoint. They were actually done, we'll talk a little bit more about it, by Stefan's dad, who was helping in the process, not just Stefan Fromm. But they're kind of cool, but that doesn't mean they should be encapsulated, and they should be called authentic, especially if they're not labeled correctly. Dan, how do you decide when CGC has just gone too far in what it is they're willing to authenticate?
Well, I want to just pull up a point you made and potentially clarify a little bit. You said you believe these are legitimate. By that, I assume you mean these are copies of these things that were actually made in 2007. These are actually the ones that Danish people had at Worlds. You're not saying these are legitimate Pokemon cards.
That is correct.
They're legitimate to the time period. They're not remade today.
That's right. They were not reprinted in today. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is, with the whole test print thing, there's at least some level of plausible deniability on CGC's part. Like, we know that a small number of those test prints were real. They were legitimate. They were from, I think I said last time they were from 94. They're not. They were from 96. But they were proven to have been printed in 96. They were real. And then they encapsulated others that were fake. At least there is some level of CGC being able to say, we got duped. Maybe we believed Akabane, or these failed. We had the wrong. We didn't put the right checks in to check the card stock. Whatever. With these, there's no level of deniability. They have just graded non-authentic Pokemon cards as authentic Pokemon cards. And I think when you say where does it stop, it should have stopped well before we got to this point.
Yeah, so I agree completely. I have to say that I just think this is ridiculous. I don't know what would be the impetus behind them grading these, and if they were to, for some reason, decide that from a historical perspective, because of the unique nature of these, and even because of the story, okay, we talk a lot about Provenance, and we know that Stefan Fromm, who we actually bought right years and years after the fact, we ended up buying his 2007 number 2 Worlds card. No,
No, you bought from. No, you didn't get Stefan's. Stefan, as far as I know, still has his number 2. And you spoke to Stefan for about 6 years on it. It was I think it was maybe the senior. It was a Japanese player who, in the end, sold you the 2007 number 2. I remember that because that, for a long time, that was the last one that you needed, was the 2007 number 2, and it was a Japanese player who finally sold it.
I don't think so.
It wasn't.
We're gonna have to correct. We'll have to look this one up, Dan, because
I can promise you it wasn't Stefan.
Okay.
Because you had been speaking to Stefan for years, for like 3 or 4 years, even when I met you, and then we both spoke to Stefan a couple of times after that, just to always say the offer's still there, and in the end, we were surprised because it was another player that came through.
All right.
I have to double check, but I believe it was Stefan and 2 Japanese players who got the number 2, which is why you'd always zeroed in on Stefan. And then it was one of the other players who actually.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I really don't remember, and we all know. Everybody in the audience knows I have no clue what I'm talking about. But I would remember when Dan tells that story. It reminds me of going to Worlds every year and trying to find Stefan. And I would kind of like, I'm still waiting, I'm still interested, and he would just kind of smile and say, I appreciate you, and just kind of walk by me. So, but I've had talks with him through the years and stuff, and so the story on these cards goes that there was actually, I'm going to tell you the story. I can't tell you specifically how true or not it is, because in the law, it's just generally hearsay, right? But I guess Stefan and his dad had some access to the print facilities or whatever they were doing with these cards. And his dad was involved in assisting in the process. And they actually, for whatever this means, they got pseudo approval from someone who was involved in the Pokemon organization to kind of try to put these cards together. They didn't just do this without anybody, without asking. They kind of were told, yeah, if it's just for not for play, if it's just for fun, whatever, we're okay with that. That's the story that I know about these. Could be 100% wrong because someone's told me that story and I don't know for sure. Again, you can put Stefan on and you can say that the people, there were some other videos that went up recently about these cards where people said that Stefan verified all of these different circumstances I'm talking about. But Provenance alone, especially when these aren't cards, really shouldn't have any relevance. And when Dan was talking a minute ago and saying, hey, it's still not cards. They're not Pokemon cards. And we're talking about the play tests. And we're trying to differentiate. There was some notion of those play test cards actually being in the production chain towards the reality of a Pokemon card being produced one point down the line that might stem from that. Even if that was the test prints or that was just testing in facilities or mock-ups of designs. The whole point was that those cards would eventually turn into something that would be an actual Pokemon card. These cards are truly nothing more than fan art. And that doesn't mean they're not worth something or valuable to people for their vintage and fan art properties. But again, as Dan said, and I'm in complete and utter agreement, I have no idea why these are labeled the way they are and in cases like this from CGC.
So also worth noting is this isn't totally exactly the first time this has happened. If you remember, it was a year and a half ago, PSA encapsulated some Danish fan-made cards. They were the ones where they designed them as blank cards and they had artists do sketches and sign them. And at the very least on those, they were autographs from higher up people at Pokemon, like it was Ken Sugimori ones or Rita ones. It was whoever was the guests at Worlds that year. But PSA labeled them kind of similar to how CGC has. They labeled them as Worlds 2007 cards. And I believe Rusty spoke pretty publicly that he paid way more for those cards than he ever would have done if he had realized it was just a signature on what was effectively a fan art, because of the way PSA labeled them and they put them in their normal red border. He thought they were legitimate cards that were associated with Worlds 07 and didn't realize it was, for all intents and purposes, a fake card with a signature on it. And then some copies of those sold again a while after this initial auction and went for a tenth of the price or something, maybe like a seventh of the price, just because people found out what they actually were. And people's biggest thing back then was, if PSA have to encapsulate this, which for PSA it wasn't as egregious, I don't think, because PSA authenticate autographs as well. If PSA were authenticating the autograph, it should have had something on the label that said, autograph authentic, fan-made card, or it should have been in like a green label, which is what they sometimes do for non-authentic cards if they have to grade them for some reason, like an autograph. But all it said on the PSA label was hand cut, which meant that obviously people print themselves, cut them up by hand, but that just sounds like, a hand-cut sheet, that could mean that, if you get a sheet and you cut it yourself, that could be what that meant. So we've seen a similar thing before where whoever has sold these initially has just decided that they want to get the most money out of them as possible without worrying about the future, or without worrying about who buys them. And then whoever buys them is getting screwed long-term, because the value, even if they do have some value, the value of what they would have if they were legitimate, or in the case of the other ones, if they were autographs on real cards, that value just isn't there.
And maybe that's what this all comes down to. Maybe this is all a value play, and that would make it all the more unfortunate. So, okay, so you have these cards out at Goldin auction, and they have minimum bids of 500. There's maybe 13 cards or so. One of the cards has a minimum bid actually placed. One card of the 13 so far has a bid of 500. There's a long time to go until the end of the auction, so it could certainly change. I'm not sure why that one has a bid versus the other ones, although it does have many more of the Pokemon characters on the front of the card. That's obviously one difference, as well as the trainer, the unique trainer, the child being on there could be different. Could be a person just buying their own card as well. We don't know.
Well, the one that has a bid is the only one that doesn't have a photograph. It has a drawing and it says unknown trainer. I'm not sure if Stefan just wasn't able to get a photo of the last winner or something like that, or if, because this is number 13, potentially they did the top 4 of the Danish nationals, and then they made these for other Danish players who qualified by the point system, because you wouldn't know if you qualified by the point system until right up until the last couple of weeks before Worlds. So potentially this one he made for if any other Danish players qualified that year without getting through their nationals, so that you could just give them these and say, okay, well, you've still got these to hand out, put your own name on them. That's why I think this one exists.
So other podcasters, again, I don't like to name names. I don't ever really agree with everything another podcaster says, because I think sometimes the notion of what they're trying to say is slighted so heavily in one direction. And again, we're trying to create something here that's more objective. So is it the case that grading these and putting them out for sale is a way to gain more money for the cards? Sure, why not? And I'm not saying that's good, because I've already criticized the fact that CGC would even grade these. Number 2, if that's the case, does it mean that the card is or is not worth the $500? Let's just use the one that has a bid on it right now, because that's the starting bids. Is it the case that it's not worth paying $500 for? I don't know, because that's somebody's own choice as to whether or not they want to buy the card for that price. Do I think it's worth $500? Absolutely not. But it's not my money. Now, if they choose to buy it because they're deceived, as Dan used that word in the beginning, then that's really bad. If they're paying a higher price because they're going to ultimately only get that card in their hands and realize this was not described adequately enough, it really is described fairly adequately, but the grading is very deceptive. Are they going to feel disappointed or that they were cheated from using their money? Yes, they will. And finally, to the point of valuation, are these cards worth anything? So to me, these cards are worth something, not deceptively. I don't know if they're worth $1 a card, $50 a card, or $100 a card, or $200 a card. I don't know if the Stefan Fromm card, being that he was so much more pronounced as a player and as the creator of the cards, his family, and it's on every card, I don't know if that should be worth more money. But I don't like when certain influencers say that the cards should be worth nothing. And this has nothing to do with the fact they have a set, because I don't collect for value and I would never collect this set for value. But what I don't like is when they say it's worth nothing just because it's now been holdered in a case and it's been called authentic. Even if they're not authentic, which they're not, well, they're authentic in the sense they were made, but they're not authentic Pokemon cards. Aren't cards that are mislabeled in grading cases often still worth money? If you guys know what I'm saying. The grading companies get things mislabeled all the time. They mislabel numbers and what the card is from and the set, etc. And it doesn't mean, as we say, buy the card, that the card itself isn't still worth some money or some value to someone. Again, I'm going to caveat and say, being deceptive. If this is a $50 card or a $100 card and it's sold for a $500 because someone is not understanding that CGC did wrong, that's not okay. But I don't like when people say these cards, just because now they've been authenticated, they're not worth anything, blah, blah, blah. They can still be worth something to someone who wants to collect them.
Yeah, I mean, legitimately, if someone came up and said, I know exactly what this card is, I have my reasons for wanting it, and I want to pay $500 for it, fine. Again, it's your money, do what you want. My problem is the fact that they've been graded as something that, or encapsulated as something that they're not, and people are going to be misled. I mean, there are definitely legitimate reasons for people to want to own these. Like, maybe, as you said, it's one of the players that's on the card. They gave all of theirs away in 2007, and maybe they want to buy one of theirs back. You know, maybe if one of the ones with a player gets a bid, maybe that's the reason. Maybe there's someone who, you know, they did play against that player at Worlds, and they got given a copy by that player and didn't keep it. And now they think, oh, I remember that, maybe I want it. There's legitimate reasons for people to want to own these and to want to pay money for them. And again, if people want to pay hundreds of dollars and feel that to them it's worth it, that's their prerogative, that's their money. But my problem fully comes with the deception and the mislabeling. I will just add, you mentioned earlier, I should have brought it up then, you mentioned that Stefan and his family said they got some sort of permission from Pokemon. I mean, I imagine Stefan had access to speak to people from Pokemon because, you know, he's a prominent player and prominent players often meet these people. All I can assume is that the conversation was, yeah, if you do this, it's not going to cause a legal problem. I don't believe at any point Pokemon would have said, we'll class these as legitimate cards. I think if Stefan had said, I want to make these and I want to sell a full set to people for $5, Pokemon would have said no. It would all comes from, I don't think Pokemon's speaking to Stefan would have been, we're okay with you making this. It would have been, we're not going to cause problems for you if you make this. It's going to be, we'll look the other way because this is nice. There's some people quoting saying that Ken Sugimori gave permission for these to be made, which is absurd because Ken Sugimori can't give that permission, because Ken Sugimori can't make Pokemon cards. Like, even though he drew a lot of the artwork for Pokemon, Ken Sugimori can't come out tomorrow and say, I've made my own set of Pokemon cards independently from the Pokemon company. Like, that's just not a thing. You know, I've spoken to people who have relations to TPCI, and they've said, no, there's nothing official about these. There's no official stories behind them. There's no links to them. It is just fully an entirely fan-made endeavor.
Okay, so I before I forget, guys, I wanted to go in a little different order, but I actually just can't get rid of this fatigue these days. So I'm going to just ask the question now. So I'm going to state the comment now, actually. So CGC, the one thing that bothers me more than anything is these kinds of things continue to tarnish their reputation. And as Dan said, you know, or alluded to, and I have before as well, every grading company has their problems. I'm not here to say, I'm not here to badmouth one versus the other. Dan and I do very little grading, almost no grading with companies, other than the fact if cards are already available as graded. But the problem is that when these companies do things like this, it continues to tarnish the reputation, creates more controversy, and ultimately may weigh in the long term on the value of cards that are graded by them. So it makes me very frustrated. It makes me angry when things like this happen because, I know in my mind what's legitimate. I know provenance for cards. I know my pre-release Raichu was graded by them. There's never been a question on that. There's been 2 of those in the world. So, but I don't think it makes my pre-release Raichu look any better that CGC is the grader of it and for it. And that's the pragmatic and practical explanation. Again, since I'm not worried about valuation because it's in my collection and I know it's legitimate, I don't ever question it. I know if I would have a question about something, and so far to date, I don't have anything in my collection that I have a question about. Okay, it's authenticity. These cards, whereas they might be authentic to the extent of them coming out in 2007, these card similes, these fan art cards, they're not authentic in the sense of authentic Pokemon cards, and they should never have been graded. So it does disappoint me that these companies can't take a step back and, other than the immediacy of the money that they're able to undertake to take in because of their decisions, not look at the long-term reputation damage that is being that's happening to the brands. And that continues when you see these media influencers moving from 5,000 subscribers to 10 to 25 to 35. A lot of that is controversy that the grading card companies are embroiled in and are behind, and that's not good controversy. The subscriber numbers for an influencer, that's great for them, but the focus on the grading card companies, that's very, very bad.
Yeah, and I think that this happening this way long term will hurt any value that these have, because the fact that these first auctions are so controversial and the fact that they've had the controversial grading, now these cards will forever just be associated as those are those fake cards that CGC authenticated. Even if the non-authenticated versions, even just the versions say that you have or that any of the Danish players have, people will always associate them with this terrible authentication and terrible auction. They're always going to have that stigma attached to them. And so fewer people are going to want them. Like I said, there are still going to be some people who might want them for reasons like it's them on the card or they played against the person. But overall, if some of these had just come out as fully open, this is what they are, we're not encapsulating them, whatever, I think people would have been so much more interested in them. Like, say, someone had just eBayed them with a $1 start, but still wrote up the whole history of them properly. I think there would have been way more interest than there is now, the way that they are, because now they're just getting this such bad reputation, and that's going to follow them forever.
Yeah, and the reputation, I hear you, Dan. I mean, I'm going to sell my set to the Danish Historical Pokemon Museum, so they're going to buy them all from me. They're not going to pay 500 a card, and I'm going to work out some negotiations. I've got my people talking to their people. Dan, by the way, I don't have any people. You might be the only closest thing I have to people. So I don't necessarily agree with you as far as the long term, because somebody grading something doesn't really mean a hill of beans, fake or not fake. It's like you said, whoever wants it. But Dan, let me bring up my last point right now. Okay, so my last point is this. I guess I'll make a second to last point, which is, folks, if you have figured this out, don't necessarily trust the encapsulation cases that you're getting. Take a double and triple check on those before you buy. But Dan, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier in the video, and I'm still confused. Okay, you talked about the fact, I said, give me some more information about that Worlds logo on the card. Give me some more information about that National Championships logo. And you said, well, they're going to see that a month ahead of time. It's going to come out, the Worlds logo, so they'd have time to put it on there, et cetera, et cetera. Dan, I don't understand the back of this card. The back of this card, it's got Pokemon World Championships 2007, Pokemon not for play use, etc. How can you explain, and it's okay, Dan, you don't always have to have an answer, even though you always do. How can you explain to me how they were printing on a 2007 World Championships card when those shouldn't be out for months after the event if they're actually going to be what it looks like when you play the game on the decks. Am I missing something there, Dan, or does that just
Yeah, these aren't printed onto Pokemon cards. These are fully custom made things. The layout was made by taping like pictures onto Pokemon cards, and then they scanned those. The same as this back will have been made by taping the World's logo or pasting it onto a legitimate Pokemon card and then scanning it. And then when they printed it, they printed the front and backs. Like, this is not a case of, they've got a Pokemon card and printed something onto it. This is a fully home printed thing. This isn't even Pokemon cardstock.
okay? If that's the case, then that's not what I was understanding from what I read. I'm going to read this to you, and you tell me if this is then an inaccurate statement by Goldin in its description. Printed their own Pokemon cards at a local copy shop by taping their images over existing card layouts to create the design. My interpretation of existing card layouts was that the backs were actually real type of cards. You're stating that they are not.
Yeah, because they said they did that to create the design, not to create the actual card. So it's like if I take this Zubat and I tape a picture of my face over it, and then I scan it, I'll have an image of Zubat with my face on, and then I print that out. It's not on a card. I've still used taping stuff onto a card to get the design, but that's not how they got the actual cards. The actual cards are just printed. They're not printed on cardstock. They're not printed on Pokemon cardstock. They're printed on, whatever stock you can get. Like, you could go to FedEx or something right now. Like, we could get a Pokemon card right now. I could, like, say, I could take a Zubat. I could tape my face over it. I could scan it into my computer. I could take the back. I could cover the Pokeball with whatever logo I want. I can scan that into my computer as well. I can go down to my local FedEx and I'll say, can I have 10 copies of this with this on the front and this on the back? And they can do that. That's how they did it. The taping was just for the design. This isn't stuff taped onto an actual Pokemon card.
So what you did there is you absolutely contradicted everything you said in the last 7 to 10 minutes, okay, in our discussion. Because if you put your face on a Zubat card and I was able to buy that, even if it would have been authenticated by CGC, I would pay a lot of money for that. I don't care about the authenticity. I just like your face in my home on a Zubat card, and that's what I want. That is important to me. So if you're willing to do that, I'm willing not to make a fuss. I won't send it to CGC to be authenticated, even though it appears they would authenticate it. And I would like to offer you a small fortune for that card as part of my comprehensive English language Pokemon card collection. Can we arrange something, Dan?
Well, I'll tell you what. Law made me some business cards that I hand out at shows, which sort of look like a Pokemon card. It's got a drawing of me on it and has all my social media handles and stuff so people can follow me. So I'll send one of those into CGC and see if we can get it authenticated, and you can have that.
And don't worry about if you can or cannot, because I'm going to wink at the camera now. I know people at CGC, Dan. Hopefully nobody's watching.
Yeah.
I can get those authenticated. They know
I'm
me
not
and I
surprised.
know certain people, and certain influencers actually probably believe I do. So just let me know, guys. Anybody out there that would you like to authenticate your cards that are not authenticatable? It's not a word, might be. I can get them authenticated for you for a very small submission fee. Dan, I'm done for today. I appreciate the discussion. I'm going to let you close up everything when I just say this. We try to cover topics, are these collectible? Are they not? When I first heard about these folks, I was really excited. I didn't say this in this video to this point. I thought they were going to be great. I thought they were going to be actual cards. I thought they were going to be a true part of the vintage history of the hobby. They were English language. I heard so many good things about them. And then I was able to view the cards, and they were nothing like. They're really cool and cute. They are nothing to do with legitimate cards. They should not be authenticated. Like I said, cool and cute, historical in the sense of how they were put together. Kind of really when you think about the nostalgia of the hobby and the games and the friendships that are made, when you think about these cards in light of that, they're cool. but they are not legitimate cards. And I was disappointed ultimately when I saw them, and I would never consider them to be something that would need to be part of my collection moving forward. But they were just a cool part of the history of the hobby, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up, is that a person who has a set of these, who has a set of, all of these from, we think, different years, is saying they shouldn't have been authenticated and they shouldn't be sold in this way, presenting them as authentic. Yep. I don't know what CGC is playing at. I have to think they must have done this authentication before the whole test card scandal, because surely if they were embroiled in the middle of this test card scandal, they wouldn't have done this. They would have played Ed on the side of caution. I don't know how they made this decision to do this, but they did.
And I agree with you completely. I do feel, I have no knowledge, I just feel that it would not have made sense for them to authenticate this after the playtest situation. So I believe what you say, that they probably did this before. So why they're out and why they're coming out now or anything, I don't have any idea. But it's but again, our points are clear for our audience. Please weigh in on your thoughts. If you disagree with us, don't bother to leave a comment, because we'll be deleted and we will delete you as a follower going forward, okay? But if you have anything important to say that's in complete agreement with us, then leave that comment and we will honor you holistically in future video podcasts.
And if you're just going to message me or comment and say, CGC does this, it's only CGC, go back and watch the bit in this middle of this video about PSA doing the same thing. Yeah, because that's all the messages I had when I put out my story. Like, oh yeah, of course CGC did this. I'm like, no, PSA did the same thing a year and a half ago. Anyway, that's it. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person, with music by More Than Never and artwork by Lore Norton. A special thanks to all our Patreon members. Join us again next time.
But they don't want you to